Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this sunny summer Friday. It might be the last summer Friday for a lot of you. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Today we're going to be talking about translanguaging or the use of home languages in the classroom. And I am Kaylin Wallatin. I spent over 25 years in bilingual and ELD or English language development education. And I am currently I'm starting my 6th year as a multilingual consultant at Wayne Risa. So again, welcome. So today we're going to look a little bit, these are kind of the sections of the presentation. I do spend quite a bit of time on why translanguaging, because even if you know why deep in your heart, and that's why you're here, thank you. But I think it also can be used to advocate for students in the use of primary and home languages in the classroom. There are a lot of resources there to do that. Translanguaging Foundations is just a little bit of what translanguaging is and is not. Translanguaging in action is where we're going to spend most of our time, which is how, what could this look like in the classroom, right? How can we make good use of home languages in the classroom? And finally, just ending in just a couple minutes of your translanguaging stance and where you're going with this with next steps. So this is an activity that you can do with students. And if we were in person and this wasn't just sort of a webinar experience, I would definitely be doing it with you. But we talk often about creating our own language portrait, right? Um, and when we do this, I often hand out like that cutout or anything that you can see there. And there are different ways to talk about this. So some of the ways to think about this are what named languages do I use? Because of course, if you're talking about your multilingual population, there's going to be at least one other language other than English, right? And thinking about who they use them with. But we all, even if we're monolingual English speakers, we all have words or phrases that we use, right? You change your register, you change your way of speaking. I am not going to swear with or at you today, but I have certain friends who will tell you that sometimes, especially if I am angry or impassioned and feeling in a very comfortable situation, right? I will use a lot of language that I would not use in any kind of formal situation or even in a friendly situation with someone I just got to know. So there are all kinds of things like that, right? And then there are language varieties, of course. There are different dialects, different ways of speaking, and some of those also have, are more appreciated or less appreciated, right? Depending on the group they're coming from. If you're coming from a targeted or marginalized group, or if you're coming from a dominant group, right? Most of the time in education, we are talking about white middle class ways of speaking, right? As well as any of the academic language that we would be using in our particular disciplines. So when students create these portraits, or again, if we were in a room together and you were creating them, you can think about you can have lots of ways that you color and why, right? So sometimes the students will color something because their parents speak a language that maybe they don't speak because the parents haven't been speaking in the home. I might only know a few words of that language, so I might place that somewhere. I might have traveled a lot, so I might place a certain language in my feet, so some language that either I am fluent in or that I have just learned again some words of is to kind of defend myself as I travel, to be able to express and get my needs met. I might put a language in my heart area because it really relates to my family. So there's lots of ways to color these in. I'm wondering though, even though we're not together, if you would be willing in the chat just to try to drop in a few things. Any languages that you speak, whether they are formally recognized languages or if you just want to kind of think about how you use language in different contexts and have a sentence or phrase to say about that, please feel free to drop that in the chat. Enough Arabic and ASL to get you into trouble. Yes. We always say sometimes you know enough to be dangerous, right? Speaking with your hands and facial expression through memes. Now that's a great one. That is a complete art right now, right? Very good. Deutsch, okay, very good. Yes, ay, español, otra, muy bien. and memes, and I don't even know if it's GIFs or GIFs, so I'm showing my age right there. But yeah, thank you. And you can keep that coming. Yes, there's acting, right? And there's different ways you might express yourself in different contexts based on that drama student background and experience. Thank you for sharing, and you can keep those coming. Now, another thing I would think about is how your own schooling supported or silenced your language practices, right? Um, School tells us, and again, this even if you're a monolingual English speaker, school experiences sometimes tell you whether you were doing it quote unquote right. And if you get silenced, it really hurts. If you get supported, you may remember it or you might not. I was very supported through school. Right. I was an avid reader and I like to talk about it and talk about things in certain ways that were, part of the dominant academic, school culture where I grew up. So your identity is very intertwined with that and your experiences and how you feel about school and perhaps really affecting your performance are very tied into that. Despite the fact that I think I was very supported, I will tell you, um, I left advanced math when we took a field trip and was told that I had asked too many questions. No, I don't know if I was really doing that. I don't know if it was because I was a girl. I don't know, lots of things feed into that, but it really shut me up. And maybe if I was taking over, there was a better way to express it at the time, but I stopped taking an interest in math after that. So all of this can be very, very powerful, right? So why translanguaging? Take a moment to look at some of these quotes. The emotions we feel when our lives, experiences, and understanding are not recognized are not conducive to learning or to building a classroom community. And I think everyone here, no matter what your experience with translanguaging is, or other languages or multilingual learners are, building a classroom community uh, is of utmost importance to you. This is a favorite quote of mine by Lisa Delpit. The linguistic form a student brings to school is intimately connected with loved ones, community, and personal identity. So we get into this. And of course, these are all the negative things that students are hearing and internalizing, right? Speak English. Sometimes when students are talking another language, monolingual English speakers, especially adults, start to get nervous. Are you talking about me? Right? Speak American. It's English time. Spanglish is not a language. No Arabic allowed here. And then students start to internalize, I am not welcome here. Or school has a secret language I don't understand. Or they notice things like, why are the brown Spanish speaking characters in the books always poor? Um, by the way, I did not create these. I mean, I obviously put them on the slide, but these are things that students have heard and have talked about. So if you really want to hurt me, talk badly about my language. I am my language. Until I can take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself. Gloria Ansaldúa. El lenguaje es parte de nuestra identidad. Language is part of our identity. So this is coming. Camila Arce Torres Goitia tells the story that on her first day of school, um, what happened. So this is just a little excerpt from her book. On my first day of school, I was all excitement, not like my brother, who had trembled beneath my mother's skirt, trying to hold off entering the doors of education as long as possible. As soon as I was unbuckled from my car seat, I was flying through those doors too fast to hear my mom yelling, Espera, mi hija. I greeted the teacher. Hola, ¿cómo está usted? Just like I was taught to politely address my elders. She said, No, we say hello. And just like that, a border was drawn across my mind. Half of me was legitimate appropriate, and civilized, and the other half was wild, inappropriate, and primitive. So then we have also, not the flip side of the coin yet, but people who think they are being, very embracing. And I will admit, I'm sure throughout my long, long career, I know that I've been guilty of some of these, right? So this idea is, oh, it's so cool you're bilingual. But then we're sending these messages that we often don't intend to. Like all the student work that we're putting on the bulletin boards, is it in English? So yeah, you can write in Spanish or Arabic or another language for a while, to kind of get somewhere. But when we really honor it, we only honor what you've been able to write in English. Looking at our text, most of the primary characters in the fiction texts that I'm using in the classroom or that are part of my classroom library or perhaps part of the school library media center are monolingual English speakers. Sometimes all texts and reading materials are in English, right? Sometimes the texts are not representative of the identities of our students, of our multilingual learners and multilingual students. Or we do have some text for them, but all the mentor texts and read-alouds that we're doing are all in English. Or again, that our lessons are not connected to the backgrounds and experiences of our multilingual students. So do our actions reflect what we say we believe? And part of today is delving into that a little bit. So the why translanguaging? Hopefully with some of those quotes and stories got your emotions going on those other slides. But now we're going to look at a few different advocacy groups. Well, they might not be advocacy groups from the start, but like WIDA and SciUp are all about how to work with multilingual learners, right? And these are what they say about the topic, if you look at these quotes here. So what translanguaging is, it's when a person's full linguistic repertoire is used and honored instead of trying to narrowly stay focused on a single language. And we do this because language practices are much more fluid than that of the strict separation of languages that we often demand in schools. So you can see now that translanguaging is a great part of WIDA's guiding principles based on there. And SciUp might have been a little later to the game of translanguaging, but in their new edition in 2024, they also talked about how important it is. And not just to support comprehensible input or giving students access to a task or content. It can be throughout education. So translanguaging is also a way a teacher teaches. It can be like a pedagogical approach. So we can do some different things with, for instance, an interactive read aloud. It could be read in one language while some of the conversations, prompts, notes, and responses are in more than one language, especially this allowing the students to respond to the reading in their full linguistic repertoire, right? They might have a vocabulary chart that's multilingual and also includes visuals, right? So a moment to finish up these quotes. And then finally, when translanguaging is embedded throughout schooling, it's a means for social justice because it validates and humanizes the learning processes of bilingual and multilingual students. What I really love is that last one too. You can use translanguaging even if you don't speak whatever other languages. The quote is in Spanish because the authors and researchers for En Comunidad were in bilingual Spanish-speaking classrooms as well as in classrooms that were monolingual in English but had a large community of Latino children and native Spanish speakers. So different ways to do this, as we're going to see, making sure that texts are available in multiple languages, creating spaces in writing, whether it's a writing workshop or however you're doing it, but to celebrate writing that of students who are creating bilingual and multilingual texts. And again, thinking about those messages that we talked about earlier. Uh, are we choosing to really produce tests in one language or in another, or using both, and being intentional about that? So looking at translanguaging foundations, translanguaging is not translating, though you may use translating initially to help students have access to your content. So the borders between languages are porous, okay, and that's even coming from Echevarria, who is one of the, I'm forgetting her first name right now, but she's one of the SciUp authors. So really everything is mixed and it overlaps. So again, you want a student to be able to use their full linguistic repertoire. And even if in the end, whatever they're doing is going to be a product in English, sometimes they will need to process in more than one language to really get the content there. I also want to think about what we often ask students to do, again, in monolingual English classrooms to even monolingual English speaking students, right? If we've just processed something, whether it's a written text, that they've read, or anything, a video they've seen, we often ask them to summarize or talk about things and paraphrase in their own words, right? We're always saying that, tell me in your words, to make sure that they really understand what's going on, right? Well, if you do have to talk about something or write about something in another language, you are certainly using your own words if you experienced it in one language and are doing it in another. So also cognitively, that really helps the content sink in. So this graphic is showing us kind of different terms that we've had. These are different areas, but they all overlap, right? For a long time, we just talked about like translating and code switching, at least my experience working in the 90s, right? So code switching is when I'm just dropping other words and languages, right? Um, really, though, that's translanguaging, right? I would be combining all of the linguistic repertoire, all of the varieties and nuances, and really kind of help when it's helping me process and make meaning of things. But also, I might be doing something external, but this is even more, even if it has an external place where I'm doing this with these languages, it is internally helping me, right? Code switching is more about who is my audience and how am I allowed to speak to them. At the beginning, when I told you that you might hear me speak in a very different way if we're close friends and you don't mind swear words, if we were out socially. Um, Translating, of course, is going from one language to another. Generally, we're talking about named languages here, right? And it's when we're doing that so that someone can have access to whatever we're talking about. And then languaging, again, back in the 90s, I used to think code switching was Spanglish as well, but they're talking about just using it in new and dynamic ways, right? So Spanglish is a variety of language, and I think really should be respected, right? Because things get very creative there. Um, I'm kind of going back to the person who was talking about memes. That kind also is like kind of languaging, perhaps within the same formal language like English, but doing things in different ways and with visuals. This is looking at transformative SEL, and transformative SEL has the areas of identity, agency, curiosity, belonging, and the collaborative. And what this graphic has done is take that and apply it to language and culture. So if you dig into this, and again, there are links to do that. Identity, of course, is more than your linguistic identity, but this is taking this framework and showing how well it fits into translanguaging. So looking at identity and knowing that, exploring and understanding one's own linguistic identity is a great part of self-awareness and very important in that piece. But obviously, if you're looking at the full scope of transformative SEL, it goes beyond that as well. So it's looking at agency as making personal decisions about language use, again, considering audience and purpose, right? Curiosity, studying the language choices and the way language works. I had the privileges of teaching in a dual language classroom, and I had a kindergarten student who had started as a monolingual English speaker who told me that California, we spell it wrong in English, that it really needed the enye because we say ña. And I should draw that out for people who don't speak Spanish. I'm sorry, but there is that enye, it's the N with the little squiggle on top, right? That makes a ña sound. So, honestly, that hadn't occurred to me, and she was completely right, and she was a very small child. So, but it's her curiosity, right, on how things work and how she's making meaning as she was acquiring Spanish in that bilingual classroom. Um, Belonging, I think, is the most important one on here because we want all of our students to have a sense of belonging. So now let's go on to what this could look like in the classroom, right? Looking at translanguaging in action. So probably you're here because you already valued and honored students' languages and their cultures and their linguistic repertoires, and you wanted to celebrate them. So what are some ideas about how to do that? So I've gotten a lot of these resources from many different places, and all of the books and things are on that Padlet. So I'm going to give a shout out to that again. So any of these things you'd like to delve deeper into, they are linked and you can see and explore on your own as well. Right. So what I liked about this is just kind of, we all get to know our students in different ways, of course, but it's having, whether it's some sort of chart or some sort of thing where you're keeping track of things, or if you ever do things with students and you ask them to share some things with you, whether on a Google form or whatever at the beginning of the year, one of the things could be, what languages do you speak? As well, of course, your interests, um, maybe a little bit about your history and places you've lived. And then if you are speaking things like who do you speak to in what language or, and again, these are things that wouldn't be maybe on an initial survey or anything, but, over time. So this is just a sample chart from someone. Again, this comes from the book Rooted in Strength, looking at translanguaging as a strength. And then you're just saying to not who you're speaking to, when, what's going on. And some of this can also be from observation. It can be from interviews with the students or the families, but kind of getting to know what families and students are doing, what are their reading and writing practices outside school. Another thing to look at that I was very, very late in my career when I actually started to do it um, are what are the language goals of the parents for their kids? I didn't ask that question. I was probably, I feel like I was, 15 years in at least. Um, like what languages do you see your students, your children speaking in 5 years and 10 years? What languages do you see them reading and writing them? Um, and of course, unfortunately, I was not in that dual language program for a very long time, and a lot of my career was, the emphasis on English. And a big thing to stress for everyone out there when you're advocating is, of course, we want students to be fluent in English. We want them to be literate in English. We want them to be successful at, U.S. school. Sure, of course we do. But we don't do that by eradicating any other languages. We do that by honoring their full linguistic repertoire. Looking into how you design your space. So paying attention to the linguistic landscape of your school is important because it sends a powerful message to students and families that their languages and linguistic repertoires are valued. That's again coming from Rooted from Strength. From Ofelia Garcia, who's done a lot of work on translanguaging and may have even coined the term. I would have to look that up, but talks about making students' languages visible and audible sends a clear message that they are valued and important to learning. So kind of thinking about this, and this chart gives you some ideas about things that you can have up that are making your environment multilingual in your classroom or in your school or in your office or whatever your context is. So we start asking ourselves, what might we make multilingual? And some of the easiest things to start with are greetings. Can you learn a few words in languages of your students? Yes, if you have a newcomer, it did happen. I met a gentleman at a workshop yesterday who told me that he learned some words in Dari because he knew he was getting a new Afghan student. And then she started to speak to him in fluent Dari because she got so excited that he could say "Good morning, welcome" in Dari. Um, and he had to, of course, backtrack and say, "No, I only know that, a little bit." But just that connection that he made with her in the doorway, with that she knew that she was valued, right? Songs are asking, students to help you with that and families. Transitions times, if you have students going from one group thing to another. Uh, Table or group names, your rules and routines, labels. You can have multilingual word walls. Across the school, morning announcements, partial or, entirely. You could have it entirely bilingual, depending on how many announcements you have in time, or just some things. Um, Bulletin boards. There's all sorts of things that you can think of. If you have any that you already do or that you might like to try, you could drop those in the chat as well. Think about your school and your classroom and what is multilingual there and what might be made multilingual. Then again, we mentioned earlier about having a multilingual reading and writing landscape, right? So a lot of things that we can do is getting like photographs of places from the community or places around the world. Again, Laura Gardner from Immigrant Connections, another great organization. Uh, I was fortunate enough to see her at the Michigan Newcomer Summit this year, and she talked a lot about what happens globally is impacting your local population always. So again, getting these kind of photographs from places and maps, not only valuing their identity, but also maybe learning about things that might be affecting people locally because of things that are happening throughout the world, right? Having children's writing and, of course, honoring it and putting it up on bulletin boards in all of their languages. You can start some classroom community generated charts, and you can get help from the students themselves. Sometimes you can get help from their families about adding words in other languages or putting synonyms in there. You can have books in a variety of genres that represent identities and language backgrounds of your students. Often those books will have translanguaging within them. And to use those for all the important texts, quote unquote, right? Those mentor texts for writing units, for example. And then whenever you're reading and writing, talk about what that's like. Okay, we are writers in this room, and sometimes we translanguage. What does that mean? What does that look like? Again, thinking about what's in your classroom library or in your school library, who is depicted and how are they depicted, right? Are they represented simplistically or are they shown to be complex, right? And then do students have access to these books? So really looking at how they're depicted. I would say once you walk in a school, like stand outside your school and think, what if I didn't speak English? And this is my first time here and I don't really know what US school in the US is like, and I walk in this building. What do I see? How would that make me feel? I would think too about walking in your classroom door, your office door, the same thing. What do I see? What would that student feel like? What would that parent see like? So there's a lovely, lovely chart. The whole chart is on the Padlet and also in the book Rooted in Strength. And it's talking about different features and different things that you can do with them. And you can think about that. So again, the first thing coming to your room they see is the door, right? The next thing they probably see are anchor charts, especially if the year's already started and you've gotten in there. So what does that look like? Multilingual word walls. And this is when we were talking about we want visuals when we can, whenever possible. These ones even have sentences as well as just the words. But again, these could be possibilities depending on what your room looks like, the population of students you have, and what you're studying. But considering that, considering things like four corner models and anchor charts. So this looks like a Freyer model, but the thing with four corners is you can make it reflect anything. You don't have to use just um, you don't have to use just the corners of the Freire model states, right? But here you can add pictures, you could add other languages, you could add, sentences. You can have groups of students co-create these. So these are just some examples here. And these are coming, again, all these are linked in this website, but there are a lot of good resources out of New York, out of the CUNY system. So again, just a bunch of more ideas. Could we have texts around the same topic, but that are multilingual? Student portfolios, language objectives, right? What might that look like? I wanted to show these examples because that first one, especially the elementary one there, this is coming from that same document from New York. And when you get in to read the story about it, this is a group of first grade students, none of whom were literate in their native languages, right? So we have Russian there and English, and I believe I'm going to have to look again. Someone help me with the Eastern language. I want to say Japanese, but I'm not sure. I know, actually, I think it's Mandarin, looking closely here. But what they did was they were discussing adjectives and how we build sentences. And you see there with the fox with large ears or large pointed ears. The teacher actually found the words or had the sentences and color coded them herself. And the students talked about where they were placed in the sentence, right? And they could see what was the same and what was different. In these two languages, it was actually like in English, where we place the adjective before the noun. Obviously, if it were Spanish or Portuguese or something, they would have seen it after. But students like to start talking about the cross-cultural and cross-linguistic comparison between languages, right? And that also helps them understand English better in the long run. The other one is from some middle schoolers, I believe, and they're talking about, again, how we're describing things. So we're just talking about something that's more simple sentence, right? Just subject, verb, and the adverb, right? My father worked hard. Or having a dependent clause, like who was born poor. And in this case, you can see that the setup is the same as in Spanish and English. So whether it's the same or different, making these cross-linguistic connections and these kind of analyses helps students cognitively and helps them in language acquisition. Some more examples of what translanguaging could look like in a classroom. So maybe we're watching a video in English and then students are jotting the notes in English or Bengali, whatever is coming easiest for them, right? Or at that moment. Because again, they're trying to process and make meaning about what they've seen in the video. So it's get it down in however they want. They might then reread their notes and identify essential vocabulary in their native language. They then, when they brainstorm with a partner, depending on who they're brainstorming with, they might be sharing those ideas also in Bengali or their native language. Finally, when they're writing the script for the video, depending on who the audience is, now if the audience has students who are sharing the language of English and they come from many different language backgrounds, then they will probably write all or the majority of the script in English. They may keep, however, some relevant phrases in Bengali, right? So this is just one example, but it can be very fluid because the whole point is what are we producing? Who is our audience? What's our purpose? And how are we making meaning for ourselves? This is coming from the authors of En Comunidad, and they show a bunch of books that have translanguaging in them, and then they have the students talk about what does this mean for us as writers, right? So here were students in a middle school and looking at this graphic novel. They were talking about the themes of place and change. That's why that's up there. And as they look through, what were their observations of translanguaging? So they would say, okay, this book has features from English and Korean, and they would cite things around that. And then what did it mean about the stories? Was it doing in the stories? Well, it was adding details about the characters' interests. It was showing their connections to family. It was adding to the character's voice, right? So what does this mean for me? Can I do the same thing in my writing, right? So again, it's both valuing the student and also letting them understand what's happening in the novel or the graphic novel. It's also giving them a window or a mirror, as Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop would say, there. So a multilingual student might, if they were Korean or Korean Americans, see themselves in a mirror there. Other multilingual students might see that as a mirror in the sense that I can have other cultures and other languages represented that, even though that I am in the United States, right? And it's not just going to be the dominant culture that's always represented. And it could also be a window in the sense of, oh, I'm learning about what this particular student's life is like. This is just another example, the same kind of thing, another giving book excerpt. So you can also see when we look at this here that we're not just talking about translanguaging and validation in that sense, because even though that's very important, we're also doing things like, we're quoting from the text and we're analyzing it. I mean, this is what we do every day in ELA classes, right? So again, you can check some different things out on this slide, but I like that last one under writing. I can consider whether I need to italicize words that are not in English. There's actually a big kind of polemic about that these days, where a lot of people are saying, no, I'm not going to put that in italics. I'm just going to say it. And, people can either figure it out from the context or they can go outside of the text to find out what it means, right? But it's such an integral part of the text that we're just going to leave it and we're not going to do that. So, there's not a right or wrong answer but there is a lot of discussion around this. So that could also be a very powerful conversation with students. Some more things around identity. There's a great book they called me Wero, and that's written bilingually, and you can see some other things here as well. All of this is coming, are examples from En Comunidad. Here's an example of a first grader, and one thing I want you to see in here is lovely sentence frame. We're always recommending sentence frames in our work with multilingual learners and actually to provide accessibility for all learners. So what she's saying here with this thing is she says, my bug needs water, so I fui a mi casa y le traje. So my bug needs water, I went home and brought some, right? What I will say right here is even if you need help to show this to a native Spanish speaker to see how this is, that even though there's a couple little mistakes here, she has got like letter sound. It's nearly well, it is perfect. The one that she's missing actually makes the same sound, like even though it's fewer in Spanish, the Y and the I are they both say E. So I mean the Y when it's acting as a vowel does. So it her letter sound association is perfect. And just like in English, sometimes you have to learn which letter is actually representing that sound at that time. If you even look at that ladybug that she writes there, it's the ladybug. But if you kind of say that ladybug, it's you can see that she's substituting a different kind of letter, the R instead of the D, but otherwise you just see so much about her emergent literacy. It's really kind of beautiful to see. So if you are in a situation where you can show someone who speaks a language to in the context, you can get a very good idea. So if this child was still maybe not writing like some of the other first graders in English, this would be a child you would look at and say, well, that's just a matter of time till she acquires more English, because look at how beautiful her emergent literacy is right here. This particular one is about a student who kind of outlined something in Spanish. This was about cell phone use and whether it should be used at school or not. And the interesting thing here is when she came to write it in English, and I'm sorry, I don't know the parameters of the assignment, so she just felt she had to or not, but she added more details and more elaboration in the English one. So she was able to get her ideas together, kind of in Spanish there, and then was able to add more there in English. Students can also, when they do this, reflect on their linguistic choices. So again, sometimes it's just at the moment, like we were talking about, oh, we've just seen this video, take notes any way you please. But afterwards, I talk about what made you do that or what was helpful about that. Was it easy to make a choice? Was it not? Was it easier to write in English because the video you just saw was in English? Was it easier to put in some words from another language, or you wanted to do all of it? You know, there can be a lot of things here, and here are sentence stems to help with those conversations. And again, students who do this have a great amount of metalinguistic awareness and just meta-analysis in and of itself, like thinking about what you're doing, thinking about how you're thinking about what you know and what you don't know. These next ones are coming from a project in California where there's a lot of translanguaging happening, very high level classrooms. I'm trying to remember right now, this was a middle school. So I believe this is just a middle school social studies class. But you can see how much they're doing. They're getting quotes out of different areas and then they're analyzing them perhaps in more than one language. And then on the left, they're taking notes in Thai and in English. This particular teacher, another monolingual speaker of English, uh, teaches AP Environmental Science and had translanguaging going on. And something that really resonates with me here is that, again, when we talk about those messages that we're sending, maybe without meaning to, is what happens when, okay, like we're allowing you to use Spanish in your algebra class, but when you get to calculus, it's definitely all in English. You know, now you're in an AP class. So again, what message are we sending if we do that, right? That the higher up you go, oh, the important stuff, the real smart stuff, the advanced stuff, all of that is always in English, right? So I love that this teacher incorporated these different things in this project that they were doing on different ecosystems. Again, all of this is linked. You can delve into it more. So different food webs happening in different languages. This time English and Tagalog and Vietnamese. It kind of depended who was in the groups. And take a moment to look at that feedback from the students. I love all of these, especially that last one, right? It is a rare occasion when my parents can help me with an assignment, but including them and showing them what I was learning was a great experience. I felt like I learned the information well because I was able to explain it in both languages I speak. So again, we can see here both the identity, the emotional validation, and the cognitive validation, right? It's not, I, I mean, I'm sure you can guess my bias that even if it was just to feel a sense of belonging, I would think it would be important enough to do. But even more than that, for the people who are worried that if we're not doing enough in English, that we're not going to, become proficient in whatever skill or concept or subject area or, level of cognition we need, you can and you do. And again, not saying that we're not teaching in English or that students should never respond in English. It's, more than allowing translanguaging in the classroom, it's encouraging it, right? And seeing where you go with it. So that was a lot. I want to talk to you a little bit about maybe thinking about your translanguaging stance. So what does that mean to you in your practice with the students that you serve, or if you're working with staff members, with the teachers that you work with, right? And what could that look like? And what might next steps be? So I am probably preaching to the choir here, as we say, but believing in translanguaging is a belief in that your language is a resource, your language is a right, and your language is a great part of your identity. And it's coming up with a commitment or a dedication to encouraging students to use their full linguistic repertoire and trying to find ways, um, creative ways and creative spaces for that translanguaging or languaging to happen. Um, this excerpt is back to the En Comunidad work. And if you do have a chance to dig into that book, this teacher started with students. There's a singer, Miguel, who grew up in a Spanish-speaking family in the US, and this is about his trip to Mexico. And the students saw videos about it and did some identity work. But the interesting thing was all the students were doing this thing, right? Understandings from the text, what they pulled out, right, um, of it, and then actions and things about themselves. And this is the part that the teacher did as well. So as they discuss as a class, they might have come up with that he's using music to connect with his history and family, and then students would be doing their own thing in the other column, right? And that he tried to communicate with family, and sometimes he couldn't find the words in Spanish, and his father had to translate, right? So this is the teacher then reflecting on their own practice, right? So I saw this in the video, so it's kind of I simultaneously, in parallel with the students, right? I could ask my students, about translating, right? How do I, first of all, analyzing my own reaction, what do I say? How do I feel? What am I feeling? Can I set them up in partnerships so that they can have conversations within more than one language and across more than one language, right? Um, if Mikkel is seeing a place that's connected to his identity, well, can I find out about my students and the places they're connected with and the places that have meaning for them? Um, so not only was the teacher, doing this with the students, it was actually affecting their practice, and being vulnerable about these kind of things in front of their students ultimately led them to even have, be able to get more out of their students and have their students even more engaged. Again, I'm not saying that's where you jump in, but it was a real way of deepening it all. So as you prepare yourself to jump in, though, you can begin no matter where you're starting. Do you work with, individual students or small groups of students? Do you have a whole classroom? Are you in the counselor's office? Are you admin or admin adjacent? Again, what are you doing and what might you shift? This document again is on the Padlet, so you can begin a preliminary profile and just think, what are those little steps that I can begin to take? When we think about these things, we can think about our spheres of influence. So obviously we have the individual, you can reflect and think what you might do personally. Then you have your interpersonal community, which can be your friends and colleagues. Family, of course, too, and operate in a different way. Right now, my mind is on the school and district settings. Your social institution, which again, I'm focused on your school and district, and then your whole community, including the families as well, right? So where might you begin? Is there just even one person at school who you could begin talking to this about and maybe making some plans with, or some goals or some next steps? How might you stretch? How might you use your power within your sphere of influence? And what support might you need to continue this journey and to grow? I just want to end with this from Dreamers, a beautiful book by Julia Morales. We are stories. We are two languages. We are lucha. We are resilience. We are hope. We are dreamers, soñadores of the world. If you don't mind, as you leave today, we'll end a little early, but we're still good for the full sketch. How is your heart feeling? What's in your head? And where might you be headed to next? What might be a goal? So if you want to, you don't have to answer all three of these, but if you might want to just think just for a moment, take a deep breath and drop one of those things in the chat, something you're thinking about, something you might be feeling, or a goal or idea of a next step you have. Thank you, Elaine. I'm glad you love these ideas. Sometimes I think I can't do them justice. Feeling touched by visual, yeah. Bilingual anchor charts. That's a great step. Yes, full community. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Yes, get the Dreamers book. Yeah. It is possible. I know. And especially I know. Yes, there are several of these books on that Padlet as well. Yes, and I wish this had existed for you when you were a child too. And we can do better by the children who come into our settings now. Thank you for your advocacy. Yes, the whole child, really parents, family, and embracing. Yes, this in person too. I also, and I people can put post-its up on different charts. And again, I should have said this before you were in the chat, but feel free to use any words in any languages that may be available to you on your keyboard. I know I'm very good on my phone, but I have trouble on my laptop keyboard in Spanish. I don't have a good system. Yes, and that's another great step, trying to learn helpful word, even like I say, even just the good morning and the good afternoon and how are you today. I'm sure some of you stand in doorways and greet and do different things, whether it's waves or fist bumps or whatever. Um, eh, so anyway, you could add some other words to those as well from other languages. Thank you all so much for coming.